Let's take you here now. The United Nations says around 93 million people in 53 countries experienced acute food insecurity in 2021, a jump of 40 million compared to 2020. Now, of these, over 500,000 people in Ethiopia, southern Madagascar, South Sudan and Yemen were classified in the most severe phase of acute food insecurity and required urgent action to avert widespread collapse of livelihoods, starvation and death. For more on this, we're joined by the World Food Programme spokesperson, James Belgrave. Thank you very much for your patience with us. I think maybe let's start with this term of food insecurity. What are we talking about?
Hi there. Yeah, so thanks for having me on. I mean, in terms of food insecurity, we're really talking about acute hunger. So acute hunger is when a person is unable to consume enough food, and it puts their lives and livelihoods in immediate danger. Now, these are people who require humanitarian assistance to survive, and that's where we come in as a World Food Programme. We provide humanitarian assistance in emergencies to people facing acute hunger.
In some of the countries that we mentioned, Ethiopia, South Sudan, Yemen, you can almost imagine why people would face food shortages and acute hunger. But perhaps talk us through the underlying factors.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, as you say, the report we launched yesterday shows that from 2020 to 2021, there was a staggering 25% jump in the number of people facing acute hunger. This jump comes on the back of steady increases we've witnessed in recent years. And the primary drivers of acute hunger are conflict and war. So think of the crisis in South Sudan or Yemen, for example. It's also driven by the impacts of the climate crisis. So think of the droughts in the Horn of Africa and Madagascar, or flooding in South Sudan or even in South Africa, for example. And then the third factor, which is very important, is, it's the socio-economic fallout from the COVID-19 pandemic. So think about people losing jobs, seeing their incomes vanishing, and being unable to stay afloat and feed their families, particularly in countries with limited social protection systems. So, I mean, already this year we were facing a year of unprecedented hunger. And from the latest data that we've seen, we're at record numbers, and the numbers doubled from before the pandemic. And we're already facing unprecedented hunger, and then the Ukraine conflict broke out. This is driving up food and fuel prices, adding yet another element to this crisis, and piling in a way catastrophe on top of catastrophe.
How is this report or this research put together? And I do wonder, particularly in areas of conflict where it's quite fragile.
So the report is an effort to gather all the different actors, all the different people and organizations, civil society groups, UN, working on fighting hunger, bring them together in a room around the table and have a kind of consensus-based approach. So it's based on all the different assessments which are carried out in the different countries, so from South Sudan to Yemen, the various emergencies, but also some of the more stable countries, so for example, Malawi, Zimbabwe, all the rest of it. So the idea is to have all the data that's available to give us a global picture of how we're doing this year in terms of the food crisis and where are we going, what do we need to do about it.
Then in enters organizations like yourselves. While you have people who are facing acute hunger or food shortages, you've also got people that waste food. Do we speak enough about that?
I mean, listen, food waste is a massive issue. It's clearly a massive issue. I think up to a third of the food that's produced globally is wasted. But for us at the World Food Programme, our primary concern is food crises, getting people the food that they need so they can eat today, but also helping them build the resilience that they'll need so when they face a crisis or a flood or a drought or an earthquake next year, they'll be able to better cope and we won't need to give them this assistance.
What is it that the everyday human on this globe can do to support the cause?
I mean, mobilize, act. You've got loads of different organizations working on humanitarian work, on food assistance. You can donate money to the World Food Programme, or to the Red Cross, for example. You can lobby your local parliamentarian. Try and push your government to act on the global hunger issue. But also, think about your neighbours, think about your community within you. Is there anything you can do within your community to help people who are hungry?
Please do not mind my very, very simple thinking, but you speak of mobilization or mobilizing, right, governments, and I do wonder in terms of maybe staving this off permanently, especially in these areas or in these countries where we see insecurity in terms of security, for lack of a better phrase, of this question. So what then do we do there? Because it would seem like this hunger is politicized.
Well, I mean, looking at the data from last year, and if you look at the food crisis around the world, of the top 10 food crises globally, 8 of them are conflicts. So by ending conflict, you'd be able to end hunger in a way. You could have a massive dent on ending a lot of the biggest, food crises. Think of the DRC, think of Yemen, think of Ukraine now, think of Syria. The list goes on and on and on. So if we were able to end conflict, it would have a huge impact on ending hunger.
Does the report, or do you quantify just how much the conflict between Russia and Ukraine has cost people in terms of food insecurity?
Yes, I mean we're looking at that very carefully now, and what we're seeing is that the food prices were already at record levels before the conflict broke out. And since then, we've seen an upheaval in the global energy markets and the food markets, with food and fuel prices reaching highs that we haven't seen in 2008 and 2011, when we had the really big food price crisis. Now, this is putting millions of people at risk of hunger, with families in many countries unable to afford even the most basic meal. On top of this, if you look at places who are particularly vulnerable, so places like Egypt, Tunisia, North Africa, places that import a lot of wheat, a lot of sunflower oil, a lot of corn, they're very vulnerable. So when prices go up, as we saw during the Arab Spring, instability can go up. And also you have instability, you have fighting. So there's, we're very concerned about the situation.
James Belgrave is with the World Food Programme, and he speaks for the organization, joining us from Harare in Zimbabwe. Thank you very much for availing yourself this afternoon.